Good evening. I am the committee chair, Kathy Kitchell, and on behalf of committee members and staff, I would like to welcome you to the March 16th, 2023 City of Roseville Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee meeting. This 5-member committee is charged with the annual review and report to the City Council on the revenue and expenditures of funds from the General Transactions and Use Tax, known as Measure B, that was passed by voters on November 6, 2018. I will now call the meeting to order. Terry, please call roll.
Chair Kitchell.
Present.
Vice Chair Krafka.
Here.
Committee Member Duffy.
Here.
Committee Member Hill.
Here.
Committee Member Spate.
Here.
All members are present.
Thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item 4 on our agenda allows for public comments. This part of the agenda is for anyone who would like to address the committee on any item not listed on tonight's agenda. The Brown Act does not permit action on items discussed during public comment. When addressing the committee, please stand at the podium, state your name for the record, and limit your comment to 3 minutes. Any public comment at this time? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and move on to item 5, approval of the minutes. This item is approval of the minutes of the March 29th, 2022 meeting of the Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee. Are there any comments from the committee members? Are there any public comments? Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I motion. Second. Approve.
Thank you. Motion by Committee Member Duffy, seconded by Committee Member Spate, to approve the minutes of the March 29th, 2022 meeting of the Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion passes. We'll move on to item 6 on our agenda, requests and presentation. Staff recommends the Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee take action to appoint a chair and vice chair for the committee to serve until December 31st, 2023. And Joe, I understand that you will be leading this portion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For this item, our Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee meeting procedures require that we elect a chair and a vice chair annually to serve through the remainder of the year. So first of all, I want to thank you, Kathy Kitchell, for your assistance all these years as the chair and your dedication and service to being the chair to this committee. So thank you very much for that. And now we are potentially moving on to a new chair. So I just wanted to kind of explain what the voting procedures are going to be. We're going to elect a chair and a vice chair separately. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask if anybody has an interest in being chair or vice chair, as well as asking if anybody wants to nominate anyone else for chair or vice chair. I'll ask for public comment and see if anybody wants to comment on, chair or vice chair positions. Depending on the number of people interested, we will either go to a vote or just straight to a motion to select a chair, and then we'll move forward and do the selection of a vice chair. And this is to do basically all of the meetings of the Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee through 2023, and then next year we will do this selection procedure again. So all that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Chair Kitchell to ask to see if there's any public comments before we move into nominations.
Are there any public comments on this item? Seeing none?
Okay.
Proceed.
I'm going to ask if anyone would either like to express an interest in the role of the chair or if they would like to nominate anyone for the role of chair at this time.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Does it matter if people are terming out at The middle of 2023?
We should be done with everything because everybody's term ends in June of 2023. So we should have been all the way through to City Council with the report and everything by then. Yeah.
I'll volunteer.
Okay.
No one else is interested?
Great.
Okay. Committee Member Hill has an interest in being chair.
I'll second that if that's necessary.
Okay. Anybody else have an interest? Any nominations? Okay. Then we will formally go through. How about this? Would anyone like to make a motion to select Committee Member Hill as the chair of the Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee for 2023? Anybody?
Oh, sorry.
I'll second it.
Okay. So Committee Member Krafka has made the motion. Committee Member Duffy has seconded the motion. So now that we have a first and a second, Terry, will you please call the roll on this?
Chair Kitchell,
To appoint, yes, this is to appoint Committee Member Hill as the chair.
Yes.
Vice Chair Krafka,
Yes.
Committee Member Duffy,
Yes.
Committee Member Hill,
Yes.
and Committee Member Spate.
Yes.
Okay. Congratulations.
Thanks. It was a rough road.
Hard-won campaign. Do we switch now?
Okay, so we're going to do the selection of the vice chair, and then we will switch technically, yes. So Chair Hill will take care of the rest of the meeting. So right now, we're going to go and do the vice chair selection. So same sort of thing. Does anybody have an interest in the position, or would anybody like to nominate anyone for the position of vice chair?
It's really easy.
Could I nominate,
Congratulations. Would you like to
I was
stay
like, could I
on?
nominate Vice Chair Krafka to return?
Sure.
What a girl.
Let's have an interest. Okay, this is pretty easy. Would anybody like to make a motion to select Vice Chair Krafka to be Vice Chair of the Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee for the remainder of 2023?
I'll make that motion.
Okay,
I'll second.
okay, thank you. Motion's been made and seconded. Terry, can you please call the roll?
Chair Hill,
Yeah, there we go.
Committee Member Kitchell,
Yes.
Committee Member Krafka,
Yes.
Committee Member Duffy,
Yes.
and Committee Member Spate.
Yes.
Okay, congratulations. So now this is the time that former Chair Kitchell, you can hand over the meeting to now new Chair Stephanie Hill.
Do we
Congratulations.
actually change seats also?
You don't have to. You can.
Oh, okay.
You can stay where you're at.
Because we have to move all the other things.
All right. Please help me welcome our new chair,
Thank you.
Yes.
Chair Hill.
Okay. I'm glad I printed out the script. So staff recommends the local
Do you have a
sales
copy
tax
of the
citizens
current
oversight.
agenda?
I'm sorry.
Committee Member Spite had a question. Thank you. Staff recommends the local sales tax citizen oversight committee take action to, I'm on the wrong page. I've already messed up. We will now hear a presentation by Dennis Kaufman, Assistant City Manager, Chief Financial Officer, and Scott Pettengell, Assistant Finance Director on the city's year-end report.
Thank you. Good evening, Committee Chair Hill and committee members. My name is Dennis Kaufman. I'm the Assistant City Manager and Chief Financial Officer for the city, and I'll be presenting on the two agenda items tonight with the assistance of Scott Pettengell, our Assistant Finance Director. As a reminder, the role of this committee is to annually review the revenue receipts and expenditures of the Measure B sales and use tax, and to annually review the status of programs and services funded wholly or partially with proceeds of the Measure B sales tax, and to annually prepare and present an independent report to the City Council regarding the revenues and expenditures of the Measure B sales tax. I also thought I would remind you a little bit about Measure B because it is a general sales and use tax not dedicated to a specific purpose. It's a general fund revenue source that's budgeted similar to property tax and the Bradley Burns sales tax, and that general fund expenditures are budgeted at the discretion of the City Council for any program or service. And expenditures made with general tax revenues, including Measure B revenues, are not tracked separately within the general fund. I also wanted to make a note that our meeting tonight is about 5 weeks later than planned because we had turnover of some of our key accounting personnel this year during our audit timeline, and so that's why we're having our first meeting tonight. So this item, 6.2, is the year-end report for fiscal year 2021-22. It's the year that started July 1st, 2021, and ended at June 30th, 2022. And Scott and I will make the presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions from the committee at the end. As you saw, this agenda item has about 803 pages in your agenda packet, but I promise that we're going to bring it together and into a succinct presentation. I thought I'd start off with an overview and then hand it over to Scott to go into a little more detail about the year-end results. But before we dive too much into fiscal year 2022, I wanted to wrap up our discussion from last year, fiscal year 2021, because as you will recall, you requested in your report to the City Council last year that we come back and provide more information about how the City Council voted to spend the fiscal year 2021 surplus, which was $28.5 million. And so you can see on this slide the surplus that's listed at the top. And then when we presented to you early last calendar year, we shared with you the $5.4 million of expenditures that were budgeted by the City Council for street resurfacing projects, a fire truck replacement, and the replenishment of our general fund contingency for some repairs that were done at the Roseville Aquatic Center. And those totaled $5.4 million. And then the City Council held their strategic planning workshop subsequent to this committee meeting. And then staff brought forward another $9 million of recommendations in May last year, highlighted there in blue, using that surplus. As well as appropriating $2 million to create a new development services stabilization reserve. This was the new fiscal policy that the council adopted to prepare for the next economic downturn that has an impact on development. A lot of the activities that our development services department manages in the planning and building functions of the city involve them collecting significant revenues in one year. And those development projects oftentimes take multiple years to complete. And so this new policy allows them to carry over excess revenue from one year into future years so that they can maintain staffing in an economic downturn to complete projects that have been paid for by developers. And so it's a new reserve, but it's funded specifically by development fees, development revenue, not tax revenues, not Measure B revenues. And so that left $12.1 million of surplus from fiscal year 2021 available that were built into the proposed budget, and that is highlighted there in orange. So on the next slide, we have the breakdown of the $9 million that council approved in May of 2022. And this included a variety of categories of spending, which you can see here on the slide. In that equipment replacement category, the city needed to replace the equipment that's used at the libraries to check out all of the books and materials. It's a computerized system that's quite expensive to replace. There were also repairs that needed to be made to pool equipment at the Roseville Sports Complex, as well as some equipment for the fire department, including defibrillators and radios. And then in the facility rehabilitation category, the Mahaney Park tennis courts were in very bad shape because the trees caused the playing surface to crack, and so those were replaced. There was also improvements done at the fire training center, and then improvements were done throughout the park system for concrete repairs where walkways were cracking and that type of thing. And so that added up to about $2 million. And then in the vehicle replacement, about $400,000. The majority of that was an armored vehicle for the police department, replacing one that was at the end of its useful life. And then You see about $200,000 there for the Real-Time Crime Center. That was an augmentation of an existing project budget. The police department uses a Real-Time Crime Center to monitor what's going on in the city when a crime is happening. And it used to be one person in a cubicle with a couple monitors, and the software was very old, and it was not a modern real-time crime center. And so the city has made it a priority to build out the functionality of that whole system. And so now they're going to have a small wall of screens with software that allows the police department to tap into traffic cameras and other types of real-time cameras when a crime is happening, just like you see on law enforcement television shows, where they can track a license plate that's red as it goes across the city to try to catch criminals. So that's what that was all about. And then $4.1 million was approved to transfer to our Youth Development Fund, which is used for our Adventure Club program, as well as the city's Unemployment Insurance Fund. Both of those funds had significant impacts during the pandemic. And so this replenished those funds that had been deficit spending during the pandemic. As you'll recall, the city received money from the American Rescue Plan Act to replenish the city's lost revenue during the pandemic, but it didn't allow us to use it to reimburse things that happened before the rescue plan was passed by Congress. And so we had to use general fund money to replenish those two funds, and then we're using the rescue plan money to do things that the general fund would have done otherwise. And so that's what that $4.1 million was. And then in the proposed budget for the current fiscal year, council appropriated the final $12.1 million, and you see the list there. The Pension Reserve Trust Fund, this is a new trust fund that the council has adopted through another financial policy. This is a common mechanism that cities and other governments are using to set additional money aside to manage the city's pension liability. But this is an alternative to sending more money to CalPERS. This allows us to put it in a separate trust fund with managed investments that can be used at any time to pay for pension contributions if we have years where our pension contributions go a lot higher and we have budget difficulties during an economic downturn. This would allow us to pull out of a pension reserve. But because it's in a trust fund, that money can only be used for pension contributions. And like I said, it's very common right now for cities to establish these to set additional money aside to help through economic downturns to make those contributions. The Roseville Sports Complex, now called the Roseville Soccer Complex. I imagine you've heard about this through the media, through council presentations. This project is a large project. It was actually, the construction agreement was approved by the City Council last night to proceed with the project, and this was one of the funding sources for that project. This is to build a 10-field soccer complex on the west side of Roseville, and this is part of the City Council's strategic planning goal to really encourage sports tourism. And they have studies that show that building these big soccer complexes attract families from across the state and even from out of state to come to Roseville, to stay in our hotels, to spend money at the mall and our restaurants. And so from a hotel tax and a sales tax perspective, the belief is that this soccer complex, not only will it be a great amenity for City of Roseville, but it'll be a net positive economic generator for the city as well. And then our fire station alerting system, this is the technology in each of the fire stations that connects to our dispatch center that alerts the fire station that they need to respond to an emergency, and the technology and the software and the lights and the sirens that we've been using for years and years and years are very outdated and breaking, and so we have a project to replace all of that equipment and software and actually improve the way that it works with new bells and whistles, if you don't mind the phrase, to also help potentially increase response time. So that is how all of the fiscal year 2021 surplus was approved by the City Council. And so I'll roll into now what is in your report for the fiscal year 2022 for our report. You have a a draft of our scorecard. I'll talk more about it later, but I call it a draft because staff prepared it for you to use for your report to the City Council. Last year, you attached it as an attachment to your memo to the City Council. I imagine you may want to do that again, but we called it a draft. We've already made one change to it that I'll talk about a little bit, and we're open to additional changes at your request. Also in the staff report agenda packet is our budget for fiscal year 2021-22, as well as our year-end budget report that we presented to the City Council, as well as a budget adjustment for using some of the surplus from fiscal year 22. We'll talk about that. We also have our fourth quarter budget report included. And then another thick document that's in there is our annual comprehensive financial report. Those are our audited financial statements for last fiscal year. And we've identified a few page numbers there where you can find information about the Measure B sales tax. We've also provided some general ledger details so that you can see details of the cash receipts related to the local sales tax. We've also included, again, our general fund reserves policy because we do talk a little bit about reserves in the scorecard. And then we also attached for your reference your memo from last year so that you have kind of a starting point as a reference to start working on your report. Within the budget book for fiscal year 22 on the next slide, we've also identified pages where you can find references to the Measure B local sales tax. Throughout the budget book, we talk about Measure B, but we want to bring those to your attention. And then before I turn the presentation over to Scott to go into a little bit more detail about fiscal year 22, I just wanted to remind you that when we adopted the budget for fiscal year 22, it was early spring of 2021. We were only 1 year into the pandemic. Many people were still working from home, and there was still a lot of uncertainty about what was going on in the economy because of the pandemic. And you know, as you've heard in the state fiscal condition and with governments throughout California, we look at the state budget. They had a huge budget surplus, and now they're predicting big budget deficits. There's just been a huge amount of economic uncertainty during the pandemic and even coming out of the pandemic. And so when we adopted the budget for fiscal year 2022, because of that uncertainty, we were pretty careful about what we added to the budget. There was not a lot of ads. We had a lot of requests from departments to add new positions, but our city manager and city council held the line because of that uncertainty related to the pandemic. But we also recognize that we're a growing city. And amazingly, during the pandemic, we are actually growing faster than before the pandemic. And so as a result, you will see in the budget that we were adding positions because we had to continue providing services to the growing city. You'll also notice as you look at the cost increases in the budget and in the actual results, you'll see labor cost increases there, even where positions weren't added. And that's because our pension contributions to CalPERS are still going up, and the city negotiated increases to medical benefits for employees, partly because insurance rates continue to go up a lot, but also because the more the city helps employees afford their medical insurance, it's less that we put into salaries, which are pensionable costs. And so we try to balance how much the city puts into medical contributions versus salaries for that reason. And then we have to continue making some increases in the budget for materials, services, and supplies to continue maintaining the parks and all of the things that the city does in the general fund. And then you'll see in the budget book, we talk about having to address new federal and state mandates, particularly in the utilities, but within the general fund, within police and fire, there's always new state and federal mandates that we have to either add staff or add other budget increases to address. And then finally, you'll see in the budget that we added some positions and some budget to address some of the City Council's strategic priority areas, whether it be regional approaches to address homelessness. There was a focus on abating graffiti in the city and a number of other strategic priorities. Paying down pension liability is one of those strategic priorities, so you'll see that in there as well. So with that context, I'll turn it over to Scott to kind of walk through all of the numbers, and then I'll wrap us back up going over the scorecard.
Thank you, Dennis. So I'm going to begin with some revenue highlights from the fiscal year 22 budget. The city's largest sales tax source, the Bradley Burns sales tax, was expected to recover by 6.4% in fiscal year 21 and 6% in fiscal year 22, before returning to a more normal growth rate in the 2 to 4% range. The budget estimate for Bradley Burns included in the adopted budget was $58.5 million. Measure B local sales tax was expected to recover by 4.5% in fiscal year 21 and 2.5% in fiscal year 22. The revenue budget for Measure B was $21.2 million in the fiscal year 22 budget. Measure B didn't decline as much during the pandemic because it captures more internet sales activity, which was up during the pandemic. So the rate of recovery isn't as high as the Bradley Burns sales tax. So this next slide provides a pie chart of our general fund revenues by revenue type. The revenue budget totaled $177 million for fiscal year 22. And the largest revenue sources for the general fund were the sales tax, consisting of Bradley Burns sales tax at $58.5 million and Measure B at $21 million, as I mentioned previously, and property tax at $57.6 million. These revenue streams represented 78% of general fund revenues. The remaining 22% consist of over 100 lines, including franchise fees for cable and electric utility for using the public right-of-way, charges for service, transfers in, and other taxes and revenues. This graph provides a multi-year comparison of sales tax revenues, including the collection of Measure B in fiscal year 19. Fiscal years 12 through 19 in this graph reflect actual revenues collected. The fiscal year 21 bar represented the forecasted sales tax estimate when the 22 budget was adopted, and the fiscal year 22 column represents the revenue estimate including the fiscal year 22 adopted budget. When the 22 budget was adopted, the sales tax revenue had more than doubled since 2012, from $39 million to the fiscal year 22 budget estimate of $80 million, thanks partly to Measure B. The dip and subsequent uptake in revenues in 18-19 are primarily due to a state software upgrade that delayed us in receiving some of our sales tax revenues until fiscal year 19. This slide provides a pie chart of general fund expenditures by department. The total adopted general fund expenditure budget totaled $176 million. Police and fire budgets totaled $86.6 million, or $49 million and $37.6 million, respectively. The Parks, Recreation, and Libraries Department expenditure budget totaled $27.4 million. The other expenditures totaling about $31 million included budgets that don't align with any of our operating budgets and included items such as transfers to other funds, including the Economic and Stabilization Reserves and the advanced CalPERS payment that we'll cover in more detail on a later slide. The general government category, $11.2 million, includes the city council, city manager, city clerk, city attorney, finance, and HR budgets. The balance of the expenditure budget includes the Development Services Department at $10.3 million, Public Works Department at $8.4 million, and the Economic Development Department at $900,000. This next chart provides an overview of our general fund spending on a percentage basis. One primary takeaway from this chart is that police and fire make up approximately half of our general fund expenditures at 49%. The balance of the funding is used to support parks, recreation, libraries, general government functions, development services, public works, and economic development. This next slide provides a snippet of a chart in the draft Measure B scorecard showing fiscal year 19, 21, and 22 adopted budgeted expenditures. General fund expenditures increased by 10% overall as compared to fiscal year 21, primarily due to labor cost increases associated with new positions that I'll go over in more detail on the next slide, benefits, and increasing material, service, and supply costs. The budget in the all other general fund expenditures and transfers category increased by 22%, primarily due to a $6 million additional discretionary payment to CalPERS to pay down our city's pension liability. In addition, the budget included a $1.2 million transfer to the emergency reserve and a $2.4 million transfer to the stabilization reserve to reach the target reserves of 10% and 15% respectively. This slide shows our staffing levels for fiscal year 19, 21, and 22. Overall staffing increased by 4%, or 29 positions in fiscal year 22. The most significant increase was 8% in the Parks, Recreation, Libraries Department. The additions included a parks supervisor and 3 park maintenance workers to help maintain the city's continually growing park system. The 6% increase in public works staffing included the addition of an engineer to assist with street maintenance projects, traffic study requests, and capital improvement projects. Also, administrative staff was added to help the streets division process an increase in invoices and track assets. Fire staffing levels remain constant at 119, but with the new fire station number 8 underway, additional fire staff is planned for the fiscal year 24 budget. Additional details on these staffing increases are available in the Measure B scorecard, as well as our adopted budget book. On this next slide, we show the status of our general fund reserves as of the end of fiscal year 22. For reference, we included our council-adopted general fund reserve policy in your packet materials. After taking into account the growing costs of city operations and the proposed augmentations, the adopted budget included a transfer of $2.4 million of general fund resources in the stabilization reserve to achieve the council policy target of 15% of general fund operating expenditures. The budget also included a transfer of $1.2 million into our general fund emergency reserve to maintain the council target of 10% of general fund operating expenditures. The purpose of the city's stabilization reserve is to address revenue shortfalls caused by an economic downturn, and the purpose of our emergency reserve is to address expenditures necessary during a citywide emergency. Taking an additional step to address our city's pension liabilities with CalPERS, the City Council established a strategy to address pension liabilities after general fund reserve targets are met under its strategic plan goal of remain fiscally responsible. The adopted budget included $6 million for the city's first additional discretionary payment to CalPERS. At the time of this decision, the CalPERS actuarial valuation showed that the city's overall funded status ratio is about 65%, when the ideal ratio is about 80 to 95%. The city's total unfunded liability was $387 million, and that's the portion of the total liability that isn't currently funded. The benefits of making these additional benefits include paying down our unfunded liability, increasing the funded status of the plan, and reducing future pension costs to build future capacity in the budget to maintain city service levels. The fiscal year 22 budget for Measure B of $21.2 million equates to approximately 12% of our $182 million general fund budget. Without Measure B, essential services and programs would have faced significant reductions. The city wouldn't have been able to establish a stabilization reserve to mitigate reductions in the short term and make fiscal health investments such as paying down the CalPERS pension obligation. Moving on to general fund year-end results. The general fund ended fiscal year 22 with a $31.5 million surplus, consisting of $28.7 million in operating revenues of estimates and $2.8 million in expenditure savings. The primary factors contributing to the positive results were stronger than anticipated sales and property tax revenues and salary savings due to vacant positions. The net result was a $31.5 million one-time increase in our general fund balance. This slide provides an overview of general fund revenue sources and the factors that contributed to the $29 million in positive revenue results. Bradley Burns and Measure B sales tax revenues exceeded estimates by $11.2 million and $7.2 million, respectively. Similar to 21, these positive sales tax results were primarily due to 2 factors. First, the 22 budget was developed in the spring of 21, when there's still a lot of uncertainty related to the pandemic and its impact on the economy. And second, Sales tax revenue growth was stronger than anticipated locally and across the state, primarily driven by inflation and strong economic activity in the general retail, food products, transportation, construction sectors, and internet sales. The balance of the positive results were from property tax and other revenues, offset by a shortfall in the Parks, Recreation, and Library Department program revenues because the pandemic impacted their programming in the first 2 quarters of the fiscal year. So this slide's similar to the last slide, but also provides additional information on the general fund operating revenue results, including the amended budget and total actual revenues received. The variance between a revenue budget and revenue actuals is circled in red. You can see from the slide that sales tax revenues, including both Bradley Burns and Measure B, are our largest general fund revenue source, followed by property tax. These 3 revenue streams combined realize the most significant positive revenue results. As mentioned earlier, Parks, Recreation, and Library revenues were slightly under budget, and other revenues exceeded estimates by $7.9 million, primarily due to TOT, or Transient Occupancy Tax, Property Transfer Tax, and Building Permit revenues. And overall, general fund operating revenues ended the year 16% above estimates. This slide is another snippet from your Measure B scorecard and shows actual sales tax revenues received since fiscal year 19. It's a bit different than the earlier sales tax bar chart that I shared, which included both a combination of actual revenues received and the forecasted budgets for fiscal year 21 and 22. And this graph illustrates how Measure B revenues have steadily increased, enabling the city to maintain and expand service priorities to meet the city's needs and a growing population. Moving on to expenditures. This slide provides the year-end expenditure results by department compared to the amended budget. All the general fund departments ended the year under budget due to salary savings from vacant positions and material service supply savings. Overall, departments expended approximately 98% of their budgets, resulted in expenditure savings of $2.8 million after taking into account encumbrances related to service agreements that are planned to be expended in fiscal year 23 or the current fiscal year. I also wanted to note that the general government category includes support departments, which include the council, city manager's office, city attorneys, city clerk, finance, public affairs, communication, and the human relations department. Parks, Recreation, Library positive expenditure results of $1.3 million due to the pandemic impacts mentioned earlier offset their revenue shortfall of $500,000. On January 18, 2023, the City Council approved a budget adjustment to appropriate the fiscal year 22 surplus towards the items outlined on this slide. These items aligned with the intent of Measure B as well as the City Council strategic plan. The budget included $15 million for the construction of the Roseville soccer complex, a transfer of $4.49 million to fund high-priority capital requirements, and a transfer of $4.49 million to the new pension trust fund to help manage future increases in required pension contributions during the economic downturns, as Dennis mentioned. The adjustment also included funding to widen Blue Oaks Boulevard and replenish the general fund contingency because we had to use a portion of this funding to pay down higher than anticipated labor market adjustments, as well as the replacement of the police department mobile data computers. A comprehensive summary and description of all the adjustments are included in your agenda materials. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Dennis to conclude the presentation.
All right, so as I mentioned, the scorecard is included in your agenda packet. We've considered it a draft, and you may notice in the slide presentation, we added the fiscal year 2018-19 baseline year data for positions and budget. And our intent will be to keep it there for the future, so anybody who looks at this 20 years from now will know what things look like when the ballot measure was approved. The scorecard, we developed this last year with the help of a consultant from Management Partners, as you all will recall, and the format is very similar. We explained last year that national community survey, the city plans to do that every other year, and so the scorecard this year does not include that survey because we'll do it again this coming year. We included a comparison of staffing from fiscal year 22 compared to 21 and budgeted expenditures like you saw in the presentation. And we included in the scorecard descriptions of some of the main budget changes, the positions that were added and some of the other changes, as well as a summary of the year-end results. So we hope that you've got enough information in there from this presentation kind of boiled down into the scorecard that you're able to both attach it to your report or memo, but also have a succinct summary of the information. So with that, this item is for information only. You don't have to take action on it. But I think it's important for you to have all of this information for context, particularly about how the budget was developed, because there was so much uncertainty. You know, we all look at that, the surplus for 22 and 21 being very large and larger than ever before. And, you know, we get the question all the time, well, should we expect that again this year, next year? And the answer is no. The sales tax, as Scott alluded, you know, we were expecting 6% growth on Bradley Burns, and instead it grew 10%. Measure B, we expected 3%, and it grew 15%. The growth rates on sales tax were, you know, astounded all of the consultants and economists that we talked to. And it was I think it was a function of the pandemic, function of coming out of the pandemic, function of the inflation, gas prices, you know, all of the different factors that go into, you know, not to mention all the people still moving here, population's growing, new businesses, et cetera. And so we don't expect those kind of surpluses again. In fact, we just recently got an updated projection from our sales tax consultant, and the growth rate for this year is pretty close to 0, and next year is 1 or 2%. And so things are definitely slowing down. So you've got information about how we adopted the budget, information about how we ended the fiscal year 2022. I hope this information, along with everything in the packet, 803 pages, provides you with the information that you need to prepare your report for the City Council. This concludes our presentation, and we're available to answer any questions on all of this information.
I have a couple of questions. So Scott had mentioned the internet sales tax. I know we had a discussion about that a couple of years ago. Is the state breaks that out separately?
They do not.
They do not, okay. So there's no way to really tell if that has increased materially. You know, the change was, I forget when it was, but 2 or 3 years ago, where all the states kind of agreed to share the sales tax. And so the theory was that was going to go up a little bit, probably not, you know, materially, but, you know, still hundreds of thousands of dollars. I was kind of curious if you knew what it was.
Yeah. Before it went into effect, the city's estimate from working with our consultants was about $1 million a year. What happened, though, is it went into effect right around the same time as the pandemic. And so suddenly everybody was working from home, not leaving their house, shopping online. And so although they can't separate out what that new rule created for us, a lot of the sales tax that's collected on internet sales, online sales, because of the way the tax system works, it doesn't come directly to us. It goes through a pool that's countywide, and then it gets allocated to us. And that is a separate category in our sales tax reports. And we can see that during the pandemic, that activity skyrocketed because we were all shopping from home online instead of brick and mortar. But because that all happened at the same time as that new law, it masked the real impact of it. Okay. All we know for sure is that online sales skyrocketed during the pandemic, as you would all expect, and they're still higher than they were before the pandemic, because you know people that had never shopped online probably started shopping online when they couldn't leave their homes. Yeah.
The other question I had was on the budget for the Roseville soccer complex. In 21-22, there was, I think it was 9.6 million, and then 15 million for 22-23. Those are the same, going to the same project, correct?
That's correct.
What's the total budget of that?
That's correct. The agreement that was approved last night for design construction was about $45 million.
Okay. So we still got a ways to go yet, funding.
We've actually augmented the general fund funding because this project has been planned for over a decade with development fees, because a portion of this can be attributable to growth in the city, as well as the city's strategic improvement fund, which also comes from development-related fees. So we're we're almost there.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments from the committee?
I have a couple.
Megan?
So just to piggyback off of your question, I had a question on it also. So the project had been planned for quite some time. What was the original intent for funding? Because, we added 9 million last year, added 15 million this year. Where was it originally budgeted to come from?
That's a great question, and I wasn't here when it was originally conceived 10 or more years ago. I know that
Bill
there-
was.
What? I will share with you that the project estimated costs have tripled.
Yeah, I bet.
In the decade that this has been on the books. And so, and we're seeing that with all of our projects. The fire station has doubled. And so that's one of the reasons you're seeing us recommend using some of the surplus general fund funding to complete this project.
Yeah, that was part of my question, did the scope increase? Did we not have it budgeted? But it sounds like a good chunk was cost escalations.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then, so is there more of the 22-23 budget that's going to be allocated for this project as well?
We're still determining how the rest of the project will be finalized in the budget. I expect you'll see a little bit more in fiscal year '24 in the budget to finish the project.
And so, thank you for adding the baseline year. So, yeah, the reason I wanted that in there because I think the intent of the scorecard is to show that services have increased before we had the tax, right? And if we just do year over year, then you essentially have to go every single year to show to green, and that's not the intent, right? So I appreciate you putting that in there. The other question I had was just more conceptual long-term. I mean, as you mentioned, the revenue is growing significantly, right? Not only because of the addition of the Measure B, but just the growth of the city. And so it went from like 57 million to 74 to 78, 80. And even if this year is stagnant at 80, that's still significantly more than planned expenditures. And so I guess just curious on your thoughts of what the city's intent is. I mean, they would essentially have a surplus in 22, 23, right?
Well, our expenditures are growing too.
Okay, that much?
A very similar trajectory.
Okay.
Because inflation affects all of our costs of doing business, whether it's fuel or utilities, staff costs, our pension costs are still increasing. As we're working over the next month or two on updating our 5-year forecast for the general fund, our expenditures, I expect our expenditures will catch up with those revenues in the next 5 years, even without a recession, because the revenues are projected to grow in the more 2 to 4% range, and I think we're going to feel the cost impacts of inflation for a little while.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that, but even if the expenditures catch up in 5 years, there's still a lot of surplus within those 5 years. So I'd be curious on, what the intent is to do with those funds. And then the new transit occupancy tax increase, that'll add, right?
Yes.
So I want to be sure that the citizens know that we're not just hoarding excess funds, right? That somehow it's going back to them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll share with you, in part of our budget development process, we look at all of the city council's strategic plan goals, and some of them are service oriented, some of them are capital project oriented, whether it's widening a street or adding traffic signals somewhere, but some of that also is paying down those obligations.
Yeah.
And that pension liability is a big one. And as I've talked to bond underwriters about the city's credit rating, one of the ways to raise our credit, the biggest way to raise our credit rating is to pay down that pension obligation. And so our recommendation as we do develop a budget and see a surplus is to think about, well, first of all, filling up those reserves so they stay at the council's target levels, and then looking at, can we use some of that to pay down the liability?
Yeah, that's exactly. Paying down the liability and the one-time capital funds, because you don't want to create recurring expenditures. Then
Correct.
then you're going to have to increase your revenue eventually, right? So if you do the one-time pay downs and the one-time capital.
That's
yeah.
correct. And you saw on that slide a note there, making that $6 million additional payment to CalPERS based on the CalPERS
you upwards
actuarial
at the end.
saves about $400,000 a year for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
So getting back to the revenues, and Kathy may remember this from our CPAC days, but the revenues don't always go up. And in fact, they went, as I recall, they went down during the global financial crisis. So part of that reserve is in case that's needed. And
Correct.
the events of the last 2 weeks, that might be coming again. Hopefully not.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
I have a couple questions. One is, one of the purposes of the Measure B tax is to maintain levels of service. And so my question is, the new public works engineer, is that engineer going to be dedicated to maintenance projects, capital projects, those types of activities?
It was a combination of maintenance projects, new capital projects, like widenings, for example, but also traffic study requests, because the Public Works gets a lot of requests to do traffic studies. But a lot of it, there are a lot of roadway projects going on now or in design or that are desired in the next few years, and not enough staff to make them happen quick enough.
Oh, yeah. Anybody that's out there during rush hour knows that. The community survey, is that actually budgeted for, or will it be budgeted in the 22, no, it would have been budgeted in the 22-23 budget?
I believe so.
Okay, so it would be available for our next round of,
That's my
Oversight.
understanding, but I need to triple check.
okay. And then my final comment question is, we've talked a lot about the PERS obligation and paying that down, the benefits of doing that. My understanding is that the city, a few years ago, when things were uncertain, went through and renegotiated some of the PERS arrangements with new personnel. So there are some what's called classic employees, and then the new employee, Tier 3 employees whose pensions are not as generous as the classic employees. At some point, that means that the obligation to PERS is going to decrease. Do you have a sense for when that might be?
In the early 2030s, if CalPERS achieves their assumed investment return on an annual basis, in the early 2030s, our payment on that unfunded accrued liability will start to come down. But again, that assumes that they're going to meet their,
Right.
and so that's the hard part. You know, we talk about it like a mortgage, but the reality is every year when they close their books and have a new return, it kind of creates a new mortgage. And it can go up or it can go down. 2 years ago, fiscal year 2021, they had a great investment return. It was 21.3%. And that's going to cause our payments to go down slightly for a year. But then when they closed fiscal year 22, their investment return was negative 7.5%, which is almost 15% below their assumed return. So it's going to go back up, almost like the positive 21% didn't ever happen. And so, you know, we cross our fingers that over the next 9 years, they'll average around their 6.8% assumption, and then we should see those payments come down, because you're absolutely correct. The pension benefits for the classic employees was higher than it is for the new PEPRA employees. And what they call the normal cost, the annual cost of providing that future pension, is lower for the new group of employees that have the lower pension benefit. And that new law that created that new lower pension benefit has been around now for so long that more than half of our employees are now under the new lower benefit. And so we certainly will get to a point, probably in the early 2030s, where we'll see some relief from that.
And the trust that you are putting some funds into, the Section 115 trust, that will help you get through some of these periods when the returns, when CalPERS returns are not as good as they would hope.
Correct.
So it'll help even out the drain or the need for the city to pay
Correct.
from current operating funds.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, if we had another great recession in the next decade and needed to continue making pension contributions, but our revenues were significantly reduced because of an economic downturn. We would want to have adequate reserves to continue providing city services and to continue paying those pension obligations. And that's the idea of having those reserves.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm sorry, one more. So the 400,000 OpEx savings from adding those, or is that the earnings that you project from putting that money in that trust?
That's the interest savings, essentially, of
Interest savings.
paying that early.
Okay, so that was the early payment. So there's still, in addition, that's separate than the trust, right? There's a paying it early and then there's
correct.
a separate trust.
That's
And then
correct.
there's earnings on the trust too, that essentially will create savings.
That's correct.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Just curious, has the funding level trended up, down? Has it been stable?
Great question. So again, when they ended fiscal year 21 with a 21.3% positive return, our funded status went from what you saw up here, which was about 65%, went up into the low 70%. Went, much better because the market value of their investments were a lot higher. But then by the time we got to June 30th of 22 and they lost 7.5%, it came back down to about where it was. We won't know the final numbers until about August when we get the latest actuarial report. But it looks like it went from 65 to 73 back to 65.
Any other questions? I have a quick question, just a little bit related to Measure C. Can you tell me how that's going to affect any services that we're providing? I know it's not something that we're tracking, but.
Sure.
Curious.
It's going to generate an additional $3 to $4 million initially of revenue each year to help pay for general fund services. Like Measure B, it's a general tax, so it won't be, it's not dedicated to any particular thing.
That's my question. Okay.
Yeah,
But you're expecting 3 to 4 million a year?
correct, initially,
Okay.
And that's the TOT? That's
Measure C?
Thank you.
Yeah.
yes.
Any other questions? No? Thank you for your presentation, Dennis and Scott. This item was for information.
Can we do a public comment? Just ask for public
Apologize.
comment, just in case.
Are there any comments and questions, from the public? None?
I'll go sit in the audience so that you can.
Thank you for your presentation, Dennis and Scott. This item was for information only and no action by the committee is required. We'll now move on to agenda item 6.3.
This final item on our agenda is to determine which two committee members will draft the report to the City Council. Last year, the report took the form of a memo with the scorecard attached, and those are included in your agenda packet. The memo was issued by the committee and presented to the City Council last year in April. I think it was April 20th. And this year, we've scheduled for this committee to meet again on March 30th and have planned for the committee to present the report to the City Council on May 3rd. Staff recommends that you select one or two committee members, preferably two, to draft the report or the memo. And after the draft is submitted to city staff, then we'll send it out to the rest of the committee before the meeting on March 30th, which is 2 weeks from tonight. At that meeting, the committee can approve the draft as is or approve friendly amendments, which we will help facilitate making those amendments in advance of placing it on the May 3rd City Council agenda for the presentation. I just wanted to remind you, and if I don't, our attorney will, that the whole point of having one or two of you draft it and then you send it to staff and then staff will send it out to the full committee as part of the agenda packet is because of the Brown Act requirements. We can't have more than two of you working outside of a public meeting on the report. And our intent, as you see on this slide, is to get back on our planned schedule next year where we have meetings in February and March to review the next year, fiscal year 22-23, and have that presentation to the City Council in the spring before the budget. So again, the staff recommendation tonight is to approve a motion to select one or two committee members to draft the report, and we are available to answer any questions that you have about the process.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from the committee? Are there any public comments? Do I have one or more volunteers that are interested in preparing the committee's report to the City Council?
I'm willing to do it.
Thank you. Anybody else willing to help? Are you comfortable doing it by yourself?
Sure.
Okay. Do I have a motion to appoint Committee Member Duffy as the designee to prepare the committee's report to City Council?
I'll make a motion to nominate Committee Member Duffy.
And I'll second it.
Thank you. So there's a motion by Committee Member Krafka, Vice Chair Krafka, seconded by Committee Member Kitchell to appoint Committee Member Duffy as the committee member to prepare the committee's report to the City Council. Terry, can you call the vote, please?
Chair Hill,
Yes.
Vice Chair Krafka,
Yes.
Committee Member Duffy,
Yes.
Committee Member Kitchell,
Yes.
Committee Member Spate.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Great. So that is the end of our agenda for tonight. So I guess I will ask if we have a motion for adjournment.
I motion we adjourn.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned at 7 o'clock.
Wow.
Good.
On the money.